In the early 1900s, a young boy growing up in a modest household in Germany would watch his father move carefully through the world, feeling his way along walls, squinting against light that caused him pain, navigating every single day with eyes that could no longer do what eyes were meant to do. The boy watched all of this and said nothing, but he remembered everything. Nobody at the time could have predicted that this quiet, observant child, the son of a man who could barely see, would grow up to create the most iconic eyewear brand in the history of the world. This is the story of how one man's determination to solve a problem that had haunted him since childhood built the empire behind Ray-Ban. Henry Lomb was born in 1828 in Burgesungen, a small village in the German state of Hesse. His family was poor, and his father struggled with severe vision problems that left him largely unable to work in any capacity that required reliable eyesight. Growing up, Henry watched his father's condition shape the entire texture of their family's daily life. Simple tasks that other families took for granted became complicated negotiations with light and distance and blurred shapes. Henry developed an early and instinctive understanding of what it meant to live in a world that was not designed for people who could not see clearly. It was an understanding that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Like many young Germans of his era, Henry looked west toward America as the place where ambition and hard work could produce something that poverty and circumstance in the old world never would. In 1849, at the age of 21, Henry Lomb emigrated to the United States, settling first in Rochester, New York. He arrived with very little money and almost no connections, but he was willing to work, and he was paying close attention to the world around him. Rochester, in the mid-19th century, was a growing industrial city with a thriving manufacturing sector, and Henry found work quickly taking whatever jobs were available to a young German immigrant with limited English and a great deal of determination. It was in Rochester that Henry Lomb would meet the man who would become his business partner and the other half of one of the most consequential companies in American optical history. John Jacob Bausch was a German immigrant like Henry, a trained optician who had arrived in Rochester in 1849 with a small collection of optical instruments and an ambition to open his own shop. Bausch had the technical knowledge and the vision for the business. What he lacked was the capital to get it started. Henry Lomb had neither technical knowledge nor significant capital, but what he had was loyalty, a willingness to work, and $50 he had saved from his wages. In 1853, Henry lent John Bausch that $50 to help him keep his small optical shop from going under. It was one of the most consequential $50 investments in American business history. The partnership between John Bausch and Henry Lomb formalized into Bausch and Lomb in 1866, and over the following decades, it grew into one of the most important optical manufacturing companies in the United States. The company produced lenses, microscopes, binoculars, and a wide range of optical instruments, and its reputation for precision and quality made it a trusted name in both scientific and military circles. By the early 20th century, Bausch and Lomb had established itself as the premier optical manufacturer in America, and its products were being used by researchers, surgeons, military personnel, and ordinary citizens across the country. It was within this context of optical excellence and military connection that the story of Ray-Ban truly begins. In the 1920s, aviation was transforming from a daring novelty into a serious military and commercial enterprise. Pilots were spending hours in open cockpits at high altitudes, where the sun's glare was not filtered by the layers of atmosphere that protected people on the ground. The light at altitude was intense, direct, and relentless. Pilots returned from flights with severe headaches, nausea, and temporary vision problems caused entirely by prolonged exposure to unfiltered sunlight and glare. The United States Army Air Corps was well aware of this problem, and by the early 1930s, it had become a serious operational concern. Pilots who were impaired by glare were pilots who made mistakes, and mistakes in aircraft were fatal. In 1929, the Army Air Corps commissioned Bausch and Lomb to solve the problem. The brief was straightforward. Design a lens that would protect pilots' eyes from the damaging effects of high-altitude glare without significantly reducing their visual clarity or their ability to read instruments. It was a technical challenge that required both optical expertise and an understanding of how different wavelengths of light affected human vision under extreme conditions. Bausch and Lomb's engineers threw themselves into the problem, and after several years of research and development, they arrived at a solution that was as elegant as it was effective. The lens they developed was made from optical glass rather than the cheaper materials used in most eyewear of the era. It was ground to precise optical standards and treated with a green tint that absorbed yellow band light, the specific wavelengths most responsible for the glare that was causing pilots so much distress. The green lens reduced overall brightness without distorting color perception, which was critical for pilots who needed to accurately read instruments and distinguish visual signals in the air. The frame that housed this lens was designed to sit close to the face, with large teardrop-shaped lenses that maximized peripheral coverage, and a thin metal bridge and temples that sat comfortably under a flight helmet. The result was a product that worked. Pilots who wore the new glasses reported dramatically reduced glare-related symptoms and improved comfort during long flights. The Army Air Corps adopted the glasses for use by its pilots, and Bausch and Lomb began producing them at scale. But the company quickly realized that what they had created was not just a piece of military equipment. It was something else entirely. The glasses were sleek, purposeful, and undeniably good-looking. They communicated something: competence, adventure, a kind of cool authority that had nothing to do with lenses and everything to do with the image of the men who wore them. In 1937, Bausch and Lomb decided to bring the glasses to the civilian market. They needed a name. The name they chose was direct and descriptive, and it captured in 2 syllables exactly what the product did. It banned rays. Ray-Ban. The Aviator became the company's first commercial product, and it went on sale to the American public at a price point that made it accessible to anyone who wanted a pair. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. The civilian success of the Ray-Ban Aviator was driven initially by the same qualities that had made it effective for military pilots. It worked better than anything else on the market, and it looked good doing it. But what transformed Ray-Ban from a successful product into a cultural institution was something that no marketing team could have planned for. It was Hollywood. Throughout the late 1930s and into the 1940s and 1950s, American cinema was at the height of its cultural influence. The images that appeared on movie screens across the country shaped fashion, behavior, and aspiration in ways that no other medium had ever achieved. And the men who flew planes in those films, the fighter pilots, the adventurers, the heroes, wore Aviator sunglasses. Every time a leading man squinted through Ray-Bans at a horizon line or slid a pair onto his face before walking into the sun, the brand absorbed another layer of cultural meaning. Ray-Ban was not just eyewear. It was an identity. General Douglas MacArthur was photographed in his Ray-Ban Aviators so frequently during World War II that the images became iconic. The glasses became inseparable from his public image, a symbol of command, authority, and military gravitas. When those photographs were published in newspapers across America and around the world, millions of people saw Ray-Ban Aviators on the face of one of the most powerful military figures of the era. The effect on the brand's reputation was enormous, and it cost Bausch and Lomb nothing. By the late 1940s, Ray-Ban had established itself as the dominant name in American sunglasses, but the company was not content to rest on the success of a single product. In 1952, Bausch and Lomb introduced a new frame design that would go on to become the second most iconic pair of sunglasses in history. The Wayfarer was everything the Aviator was not. Where the Aviator was sleek and aerodynamic, the Wayfarer was bold and angular. Its thick plastic frame was a radical departure from the thin metal construction of the Aviator, and its trapezoidal lens shape gave it an instantly recognizable silhouette that was unlike anything else on the market. The Wayfarer was designed by Raymond Stegemann, a young industrial designer who brought the aesthetic sensibilities of the post-war era to a product that had previously been defined by military utility. The result was a pair of sunglasses that felt modern, expressive, and slightly rebellious. Teenagers and young adults embraced them immediately, and the Wayfarer became the sunglasses of choice for the emerging youth culture of the 1950s. They were worn by musicians, artists, and the growing population of young Americans who were beginning to define themselves through the objects they chose to associate with. Then came the 1960s, and the Wayfarer became something even larger. Bob Dylan wore them. Andy Warhol wore them. The entire counterculture movement adopted them as an unofficial uniform. A pair of Ray-Ban Wayfarers sitting on a young face became a visual shorthand for independence, creativity, and a certain deliberate refusal to conform to the expectations of the previous generation. The brand that had been born in military necessity had become the eyewear of rebellion. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Ray-Ban continued to expand its product line and its cultural reach. The Clubmaster arrived in the 1960s with its distinctive Bro-line frame, half plastic, half metal, that gave it a more intellectual and artistic feel compared to the populist Wayfarer. New models followed regularly, and each one found its own corner of the cultural landscape to occupy. Ray-Ban was no longer just a sunglasses company. It was a signifier, a piece of shorthand that communicated something specific about the person wearing it before a single word was spoken. The 1980s brought perhaps the most powerful product placement campaign in the history of consumer goods. In 1983, Tom Cruise wore Ray-Ban Wayfarers in Risky Business, and sales of the model increased by 1,800% in a single year. A pair of sunglasses that had been declining in popularity was suddenly the most desired accessory in America because a 21-year-old actor had worn them while dancing in his socks on a hardwood floor. 2 years later, in 1986, Tom Cruise appeared again, this time in Top Gun, wearing Ray-Ban Aviators. Sales of the Aviator exploded. The two most iconic Ray-Ban models had just been handed the two most powerful product placements in Hollywood history within 3 years of each other, and the result was a brand renaissance that carried Ray-Ban from a legacy product into a global phenomenon. By the late 1980s, Ray-Ban was the best-selling sunglasses brand in the world. Annual sales were measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the brand's cultural footprint extended across every demographic and every market on the planet. From the cockpits of the Army Air Corps to the faces of Hollywood's biggest stars, Ray-Ban had traveled an extraordinary distance from its origins. But as is so often the case with great American brands, the story was about to take a complicated turn. In 1999, Bausch and Lomb made a decision that stunned the eyewear industry and alarmed Ray-Ban loyalists around the world. After over 60 years of building and owning the brand, Bausch and Lomb sold Ray-Ban to the Italian eyewear conglomerate Luxottica for a sum of $640 million. Luxottica at the time was already the largest eyewear company in the world, controlling not only major manufacturing operations, but also the most important retail chains in the optical industry. The acquisition gave Luxottica ownership of the most recognized sunglasses brand on the planet. The years immediately following the acquisition were difficult for Ray-Ban. Luxottica moved production of many Ray-Ban products to China, reducing manufacturing quality in the name of cost efficiency. Prices were slashed dramatically, a strategy designed to increase volume, and for a period Ray-Ban sunglasses could be found at gas stations and discount retailers across America, selling for a fraction of what they had previously cost. The effect on the brand's perception was severe. Ray-Ban had built its reputation on the twin foundations of optical quality and cultural cachet. Both were now under threat. Longtime customers felt betrayed, and industry observers began to write about Ray-Ban as a cautionary tale about what happens when a great brand falls into the wrong hands. But Luxottica was paying attention. By the mid-2000s, the company had recognized the damage and reversed course decisively. Manufacturing quality was restored. Prices were raised back to premium levels. Distribution was pulled back from mass-market retailers and refocused on optical stores and premium retail environments. The brand's heritage was leaned into aggressively, with campaigns that emphasized the decades of military history, Hollywood association, and cultural meaning that Ray-Ban had accumulated since 1937. The strategy worked. By the 2000s and 10s, Ray-Ban had fully recovered its position as the world's most recognized and desired sunglasses brand. Collaborations with artists, musicians, and fashion designers added new layers of cultural relevance, while the classic models, the Aviator, the Wayfarer, the Clubmaster, continued to sell in the tens of millions every year. The brand had survived corporate mismanagement, near destruction of its reputation, and a complete change of ownership, and had come out the other side stronger and more globally recognized than it had ever been before. Today, Ray-Ban is valued at several $billion and remains the dominant force in the global sunglasses market. The Aviator, the product that started it all, is still in production in forms that are immediately recognizable as descendants of the original 1937 design. Every pair carries within it the lineage of that first military commission, that first attempt to solve the problem of pilot glare at high altitude, that first partnership between a German immigrant's $50 loan and a trained optician's technical knowledge. Looking back at the story of Ray-Ban, what is most striking is how directly it connects to the most personal and private part of its origin. Henry Lomb grew up watching his father struggle with failing eyes in a world that offered no solutions. He could not fix his father's vision, but he could spend his life building a company whose entire purpose was to protect and enhance the way human beings see the world. He never set out to create Ray-Ban specifically. He set out to build something lasting from the $50 he had saved and the loyalty he felt toward a man who shared his dream. But in doing so, he laid the foundation for a product that would eventually sit on the faces of fighter pilots, movie stars, rock musicians, and hundreds of millions of ordinary people who simply wanted to see the world a little more clearly. The blind man's son could not give his father back his sight, but he built the company that spent the next century and a half making sure the rest of the world never had to lose theirs. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.